In this lesson, we're going to be talking about operating systems, and specifically, we're going to be talking about the Linux operating system. Now, Linux comes from a long and sometimes complicated history of originating with an operating system that was called Unix, and Unix goes back to the late 60s. And there's kind of a bumpy road from where Unix started at AT&T Bell Labs to where Linux was created in the early 90s, and certainly what Linux is today. So that's why we would call it Unix-like. And there are a number of Unix-like operating systems like Solaris and the various types of BSD, NetBSD, and FreeBSD, and OpenBSD. So there's a lot of different Unix-like operating systems. And most of the Unix-like operating systems have things that they have in common in terms of the way that files are laid out on the system, and many of the programs are the same. The thing about Linux is, or Unix-like operating systems, is that there are a number of different user interfaces that you may see, whether it's GNOME or whether it's KDE or whether it's XFCE or whether it's OpenStep or one of a number of other types of interfaces that you may be looking at when you log into a Unix-like operating system. So here I've got a Linux system, and I am looking at a piece of software called Thunar, which is a file manager. And I just want to show you graphically how you would make your way through this file system. So pretty typical file manager here. On the left-hand side, you've got some favorites and some shortcuts to different things. On the right-hand side in the main window, we've got all of the contents of where I happen to be. And where I happen to be now is in my home directory. Now, I could go to the desktop here, which is also a little shortcut on the left-hand side. You can also go to the file system. So you can see here the file system is different from where you might normally be used to with Windows, for example. If you're commonly used to Windows, and most people are, you would see a C drive. And with Unix or Linux, we don't have lettered drives. You have partitions, or you have directories, and there's really one directory, and everything kind of slots in underneath it. And right here we are in the root directory, and you can see the pretty common Unix-like structures here. There's bin, and there's boot, which is really a Linux sort of thing. There's opt, and etc, and home, and sbin. And we've got a temp directory, which is where the virtual memory is stored. So if Linux needs to swap memory out from real memory out to the disk, it would be put into the temp directory. So you can see here, pretty common file manager. The thing that's going to be new for a lot of people, if they're not used to operating systems like Unix or Linux, is the way it all kind of puts together. So let me show you a command line view of all of this. And this is the one thing that is common across all Unix-like operating systems, is the command line. You're going to have some sort of shell that's going to give you most of the same sorts of commands. So I can change directory here, and I can do an ls, and you can see all of the directories that are in this particular file system. Now, I was talking about file systems, and I've got mount points, and I've got different directories. So at the top level here, you can see on slash, and slash is the root of the entire file system. There is nothing that is above root, not surprisingly. Everything that you do gets mounted under root. So if you attach an external hard drive, for example, it would be put under some directory inside of root. So for example, down at the very bottom, you can see /dev/sdb1 on /mount/stick. So I've got an external USB stick that I have mounted up here, and it's in a directory under root. So just keep in mind that everything is going to be under / or under root. So the different directories that are going to be of particular interest, you can see etc here, or etc, and that's where all the system configuration information is stored. So you can see different .conf files and different directories that store information about the system configuration and application configuration. So that's all stored there. In home, all of the users have their home directories stored in /home. And you can see in this case, there's only one user, which is mine. Now, another directory that you're going to be interested in looking in is /var. And historically, /var was for variable data, meaning the size of the data would change on a pretty consistent basis. So it was considered to be variable. So that's why it's called /var. Now, in /var, you'll see a number of directories. So /var/spool is where, in some cases, mail files may be stored temporarily. You may have print files that are stored in here. There are all sorts of other types of runtime data that may get stored under var in one location or another. So like var lib may have some runtime data for different applications. The one that's pretty consistent, though, is /var/log. And var log is where all of the system logs are stored, and application logs typically as well. So you can see we've got a lot of different logs, and these logs are configured to rotate. So you'll see, for example, up top, alternatives.log, and then you'll see alternatives.log.1. And then the .2 has a .gz extension, meaning it has been zipped. So it's been compressed in order to save space on the drive. Now, I could look at these files here, and you would be able to see the types of information that gets stored. So you can see what looks like, if you're not used to it, it looks like a lot of garbage here. For experienced Unix users, we know what's going on here. So there's a cron job, and cron is something that kicks off periodically and just loads jobs. So we can see different cron jobs that are running, meaning we know when they've been executed and in some cases what they've been doing. And that's pretty much all that's in this particular file. But like I said, the system logs a lot of data and applications log a lot of data. In fact, the Linux kernel, or the core of the operating system, logs data as well, and I can take a look at that. So in this case, I can see at the very end here, a hard drive was plugged in, and the system gave it the name SDB, which would be for SCSI disk B. The first one would be A. So I can see that here as well. So Linux has a lot of different places that it stores information, and a lot of ways you're going to get to it is by doing it by hand using a command line. Even though there's a lot of GUI tools to do things, the one common across Unix-like operating systems is the command line. So often the command line is just the way you end up interacting, because you can't always be sure what user interface or graphical user interface components may actually be installed on any particular system. So that's Linux from a forensic examiner's point of view in terms of where the data may be stored.